All right, welcome everybody to the Winning US Open show. I got my trusty partner, Mark Jeffrey, here with you today. And guys, we are so excited because today, Mark, we're talking about the
Today.
difference that makes the difference. Okay, and I was
Yes.
watching, I know you were watching this too. Ben Shelton and Francis Tiafoe had a great tension-filled match yesterday. And by the way, I had never actually sat and watched a Ben Shelton match, I got to confess. And this guy, there's a reason that Roger Federer has been singing this guy's praises for about a year.
And signed him up
140.
for a shoe contract, didn't he?
I think he did. I think you're right. 149 mile an hour lefty serve, massive forehand. But the thing that I think was the coolest thing is what you saw in the fourth set tiebreaker, saving set point, where he uncorked this forehand within inches of the line, both lines, to save set point, and that changed the entire outcome of the match.
Yeah. So
And
fearless or stupid, you would say.
and it brings up a good point. The best players in the world seem to have the ability to throw caution to the wind. And this is one of the differences, I think, is that why is it that a Djokovic at match point twice against Federer in almost the exact same scenario, where Federer hits an unbelievable slice serve out wide, he can crack it within inches of the line, and watch Federer basically unravel. And then you saw the same thing with Shelton. It has to do, I think, with genuinely not caring about what other people think about him. Am I wrong about that?
Well, as people know, we've got a course coming up called Clutch. And what we've been playing around with is how do you trust your shots and how do you trust yourself when everything's on the line? So we've just been talking about shots, and let's talk about, who we love, amateur competitive tennis players who fight the good fight, even though they lose a lot and come up short. And they would tend not to trust their shots. They would tend to ease off, get it in, or go for glory, or just put it in the middle of the court.
And by the way, you saw this yesterday with Shelton and Tiafoe in that fourth set. They both kind of, you could noticeably, palpably feel that they sort of shrunk in those big moments. But it was their ability, I think, to turn that around so fast. And then Shelton uncorks that ball. And then in the fourth set, I mean, was just unbelievable.
Okay. So on the corking, that must be instinct coming to play. Because you can't, I don't think, manufacture and control that. It needs to be instinct takes over and just lambs it.
Just
and he goes, wow, that was a good shot.
And you go back to this sort of identity, right? And so Djokovic has done this 23 times, and they're going to play tomorrow, which is going to be an unbelievable match. I can't wait to watch it.
I will be watching that.
And Shelton, to a certain extent, is like Alcaraz. He's this young gun. He's gotten the praises of one of the greatest players of all time as the next big thing, and is going to try to slay the dragon. And Djokovic, obviously, has been here before, played Tsitsipas a couple years ago in the French Open, down 2 sets. We're thinking, here's the changing of the guard. Tsitsipas is going to run on it, and then an hour and a half later, the match was over, and Djokovic walked away pretty comfortably, won the whole thing.
Yes. So he's not just a dragon, he's a multi-headed dragon, and the heads keep coming back. Like, I've got rid of 7, and then the heads keep popping back. So there's a great phrase, I think Roddick said it about Djokovic the other day, is that first he takes your legs, then he takes your lungs, and then he takes your soul.
It's so brutal and so accurate. And what you saw when Alcaraz broke through, which I think is one of the main reasons Alcaraz is going to be, who knows, you never know with injuries and what could happen. He could be one of these guys like Djokovic down the road, but he had to slay the dragon at Wimbledon. And if anybody's going to beat Djokovic, we know that they're going to have to do the same thing. That dragon
Yeah,
is not going to flap his wings and go flying back to the castle. He is there
yeah,
to defend his turf.
yeah. And I'm sure Alcaraz too, but Djokovic loves what we would call trauma. We discussed this with Dan Gallucci yesterday, that they seek it out, they get their charge from it. It's the only reason for them to play in trauma conditions. Whereas most amateurs like, whoa, let me get out of here. We don't play well under trauma. So I think with Shelton and Djokovic, Shelton's got a massively powerful surplus one. So if the points are short and he doesn't allow Djoko to get in the game, Shelton could do, what Becker and McEnroe and other young guns with no fear and no knowledge have done. But if Djoko gets into the game and starts occupying space in his brain and probably, feeding him some stuff like, you're playing very well today. You've done so well to get to the semis, my man. We could see Djokovic running out in straight sets to me, because it's just another level.
Absolutely could happen. It could happen. And I wouldn't be surprised if it did happen. I want to, Mark, talk about a little bit of a segue into our gang, the competitive amateur players, because what you said there, occupying space in your opponent's mind. I think it was Jorge Capistani said it's way easier to make your opponent play worse than it is to raise your game in the moment. And
it so is.
And so we could talk about this practically. What does that look like? Well, I think there's an obsession with hitting a bigger ball, fine-tuning the technique so that you can become more consistent, which is nothing wrong with that. But if we look at the order of operations and we talk about direction, precision, consistency being the three pillars of being able to occupy space in your opponent's mind, and then power, spin, and variety coming in much later.
Well, I would even put power down the back line, weight as in spin, variety, and then power. I'm not saying you can't hit the ball, but the difference between a 100-mile serve and 110-mile-an-hour serve is like, so what?
Yeah, and I think, just watching a lot of the USTA matches, my wife is a seasoned USTA recruiter. She's gotten, 2 teams together. We got 30 people coming into the house to practice on any given week. And by and large, most people play the same serve to the same location with the same, and sometimes they're very good serves, but they have that same spin, that same weight, more or less the same location. And I think one thing that you did so brilliantly in what was formerly called 1 Point Away, that is now called Clutch, our new 6-week training program that we'll be telling you guys about a little bit later, is we really looked at the serve as an example of saying, once you can hit a specific target, you can now hit that target anywhere in the service box. And you should be able to, if you train it properly, to hit it at different speeds with different spins, standing from different areas of the court, so that your opponent actually never gets into any kind of rhythm against you. And I know, Mark, that was the thing that you loved hearing walking away from a match.
Yes, shaking hands and the opponent going, I don't know, I just never got going today. I wonder why that was.
So you guys may not know this, but Mark was an Army tennis champion, played at Wimbledon, not at the ATP Wimbledon, but on the hallowed grounds of Wimbledon, and took out a guy that nobody thought he had a chance against. Was it Peter Harding? Was that his name?
Yeah. And lost to him too. I lost having been 2 match points up, which is if you needed a conversion on the road to Damascus, that second match with Peter Harding was it. Because he just flapped at the returner serve and I was all over the net. He could just gone off my racket anywhere and hit the net cord and bounced over. I still had another match point, but very short time afterwards, it was game, set, and match, and not to Captain Jeffrey, but
That's
Flight Lieutenant Harding.
That's trauma. And we saw it with even with Ben Shelton yesterday. Had 2 chances to serve out the third set, double faulted both of those away. But fortunately for him, Tiafo was equally tight in that set, and he found his way back in and eventually, he won that set. So I think it is about, like we were talking about with Dan yesterday, the neuroscientist, that it's about being able to manage those micro traumas moment to moment, point to point, shot to shot. And the person that does that the best is typically going to win the match, all things else being equal.
Yeah. And Djokovic would have watched it and noted those 2 double faults.
By the way, we're talking about the differences that make the difference. And it's probably plural because it's not one thing, it's multiple things. And I read an article yesterday from one of Federer's coaches talking about Djokovic, saying that Djokovic is walking on eggshells now because, he's 36 years old. He's playing against these guys in their 20s, 5-set matches, and his daily regimen of what he does to get himself ready for battle is just absolutely insane. Like we think that, what a professional player does is insane. And Djokovic takes things to a new level, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so if we looked at some tangible things that we could do as players, and we've talked a lot about these. We've talked to Dr. Aaron Boynton, who is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon, was the consultant to the Toronto Blue Jays and the WTA, Canada's national champion, plus 55. And she gave us some really good insights on that. If you guys haven't watched that episode, go back and watch it. It's on the YouTube channel or on Facebook.
And the doctor of the WTA tour, too.
The WTA tour, and the things that you can do physically to get yourself prepared. And then we had a brief interview yesterday with Dan, the brain man, the neuroscientist, giving us a really actionable tip on activating the ocular system and how we can get our eyes and our brains connected before we go onto the court. But Mark, I'm just curious, what kind of things do you do when you're preparing a player for battle? They're going into play. You were just at the Worlds. What kind of things could people do to kind of get them ready for action?
Okay. I personally would work a lot on the human being, the person, sorry. Because when you go on court, there's no switch that goes clutch person. No, you are who you are. So shots and tactics and fitness and all that is massive and important. But in those few moments of vagueness, because no one knows who's going to win, where doubt and thinking and angst and analysis could easily slip in, for the clutch person, I will kicks in. I will win this.
Big difference between I will and I'll try.
Yeah. I don't know how, and it's perfectly valid for your opponent to give it to you by whatever way they might want to self-sabotage. So I would work a lot on identity and to get real deep in a belief. And belief is not just an invisible soft skill. So the SAS have 4 pillars of belief in their handbook. So the first one is, I believe in the plan. So we've got to train tactics, and tactics need to be evidence-based. And for our competitive players who haven't got a lot of time, we need to add 80-20 into it, and possibly even 80-20 of 80-20. So we only train 2-shot combinations of plans which evidence says this is the best way to win a point. So belief in the plan. belief in my ability to execute the plan. So very specific, very purposeful drills to train the shots on autopilot and to put you under accountability and pressure. Pressure needs to become your great friend. And then the third one is belief in the plan, belief in my ability to execute, belief in self, and belief in my team. And if you look around, tennis is a individual sport, but if you even had a team of 2 or 3 people and looked around and go, yeah, we've all trodden the same path, we're all winners, they're all supporting me, that's massive too.
It seems like the hardest one of those 4 is actually believe in yourself.
Yeah.
Because it gets into the story that we tell ourselves about what we are and who we are and what we're capable of. And we know now from a neuroscientific point of view that the brain is plastic, meaning it changes every second of every day. And so we have the ability to change the way we think about ourselves. We change our self-image. We virtually move the glass ceiling that's above our head that says how good we can get at anything or what we're capable of doing. And in some cases, shattering that thing completely, because we understand that we have unlimited potential. Maybe not as a tennis player. We might not make it on the ATP tour, but we have the ability to change at a very specific level the thoughts that we have, and the thoughts that we practice lead to beliefs. And the thoughts that we have give us a rush of emotion that is either empowering or disempowering. And those emotions are actually hormones that are signaled from the body. And hormones signal genes, and genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and the makeup of our body. So literally, the way we think is changing our body. And it's changing what we believe to be possible. And if we did that, and we knew something was possible, then we would take action towards it. Versus if we didn't believe it, then we just say, oh, that's impossible, we'll never get there. So how does someone begin to start that process?
Good question. So first of all, there is a difference between pretend, fake it till you make it, bravado, I'll try, and a very simple and a humble, I will. So I think 2 things. One is you need to train with more intensity and more accountability on the practice court than on the match court. So we've gone back to our tactics, targets, patterns of play, and our shots to execute without us controlling the shot, without us being in conscious brain.
And this doesn't mean necessarily, sorry to interrupt you, Mark, that you're hitting every ball 1,000,000 miles an hour and you're running 1,000,000 miles an hour, but you have such a clear and focused intention and purpose. And the intensity is in the details of how you train. What is the quality of the repetition that you're putting in? That's one of the things we've talked to Lenny about, is we know that amateur players are off balance 90% of the time. They mishit 80% of balls. And so they're literally practicing unforced errors without them knowing it.
Yeah.
And so the intensity has to also to do with the way that you're training as much as how hard you're training.
Yes. So if you continually then make your targets smaller and smaller, and there are scoring systems for hitting the targets as well as the point, which brings in accountability for every single shot, which is pressure, and you see yourself getting better and better. And come a match, you only need one breakthrough to have that big belief brick in the belief wall. So next time you're in trauma, the brain goes, this is comfortable. I understand what trauma is. We train under trauma. We're cool. And now you get the second one. Whereas if you haven't done any of that at all, you're in the same situation and the brain goes, this is very unfamiliar to me. Let's stop it right now, because the brain is selfish and greedy.
Tony Robbins said that change doesn't happen over time; it happens in an instant. And Linda Buisson always talked about this, which is when you have that breakthrough, the brain gets a rush of energy. All of the dopamine and the serotonin and all the feel-good chemicals come flooding in. The brain takes a snapshot and forms a long-term memory. And now, the next time that player gets to the white line, not to say they're going to break through every time, but they've got that reserve and they know what that experience is like. They know what that feeling is like, and they're certainly more likely to execute. And what I love that you said there is that training under accountable situations where you have specific objectives and you're rewarded not based on whether or not you win the point, but whether or not you're able to hit a target, gets you to a certain extent out of the did I win or did I lose, which is like the wind, and more focused on process, which
it also gets you out of letting yourself off. So if you play tennis as targets and you miss the target, but you get it in the service court, you let yourself off. No, if you're playing targets, you miss the target, and ditto the other shots. So for most normal competitive amateurs, when they're practicing the serve or return a serve, whatever it might be, if the ball goes in, but it doesn't go where they were aiming for, they just let themselves off. It doesn't occur to them that they didn't hit it where they were intending to hit it. Whereas our people, small targets, lots of area for out. Every shot resonates. Did I do what I said I would do, or did I miss? Do
incidentally,
I need to increase my targets or reduce them?
Incidentally, just on targets, we learned this from Lenny, that the brain loves a small target. And so
that's why you have sniper rifles. Snipers, small targets. The brain loves small targets. It hates vagueness and bigness.
So something that you can do practically, if you're watching this right now, is go out, if you're working on your serve, get a bucket of balls, get some cones, and create a box in the service box based on your standard to be able to hit that target. And maybe it starts with a 4 foot by 4 foot target, or maybe it starts with a 2 by 2. And within that target, place a dime or a dot or something really small as your intention to aim for, the target to give your brain, and work on hitting that target. And once you get yourself to about 70% accuracy, you can shrink that target. And what this allows you to do, obviously, is get very clear about what you're visualizing in your routine. We talk about visualization a lot in the clutch course and why it's so valuable. And I know we're bouncing around a little bit here, but I guarantee you that the best players in the world are the best visualizers, without a question. In fact, one of the reasons Roger Federer doesn't have to look at where the ball's going at contact is because he's visualizing. And it's just such a powerful concept because we know neurologically what happens in the brain when we're fully present and we visualize powerfully. We're actually activating the same circuits in the brain in the same way as if we were actually doing the thing. They've done studies with piano players that gave them one-handed exercises of chords and scales. And one group, played the scales every day. The other group visualized playing the scales every day. They took a brain scan after 6 weeks and they found the same circuits were being orchestrated in the brain in both groups. And in fact, the group that never touched a piano, lo and behold, could actually play the piano after 6 weeks. So
orchestrated was a good, funny word. Ramon, how long did it take you to think of that?
It just slipped out. It's kind of like kind of the way Shelton got out of that third set. So
yeah. So just to kind of bring it to a close, the topic of this is the difference that makes the difference. And as you get into the top 100, and you're in the first week of the US Open, there are differences that makes the difference to get into the second week. Often, even though the score, like Taylor Fritz and Djokovic, for instance, if you look to the score, you think Taylor Fritz had a hammering, and to some extent he did, but he played amazing tennis most games. He just couldn't find 4 points on the bounce. So most matches are relatively close. There might be a 5% difference. So that's the difference that makes the difference. And now we're going into the second week, into the quarters, and now we're about to go into the semis, and then the final, and then winner and loser. And there's about £1 million difference between winner and loser.
And such is the case if you're playing a USTA match. If you made it to sectionals, for example, our guys team get ready to go to sectionals. And the difference between the team that makes it to the final and the team that wins the final monetarily doesn't change, but the emotion will be drastic. The one that gets to go to nationals. And it's the same way if you're playing local tournaments. And if you're playing a tournament right now, the difference between you maybe being ousted in the first round and going all the way is not necessarily thousands of hours on the court. In fact, we know that's not the case. It might just be that you got to train a few specific two-shot combinations in a certain way to become so clear about an evidence-based plan that you've rehearsed and you've practiced and you've trained, that you've created the belief because you're actually executing it. It's not, airy-fairy, pie in the sky stuff. You actually did it. And you've changed the way that you've trained so you're on balance a lot more often. We'll tell you more about that later. You got a shot to go a lot further in a very small amount of time. And one of the reasons we've had guys that had never beaten an opponent in 7 trips come back and in a couple weeks serve up a double bagel. Well, if you change the way you train, you should get different results. And if you keep, obviously you keep doing the same thing every day, then things don't change. So, guys, this has been such an amazing conversation. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or wherever else this might be, and there's any questions that we didn't get to that you're dying to ask, put them down in the comments. Share this with somebody who you think might find it helpful. And Mark, before we sign off, anything else to say?
No, I'm just going to be riveted to these next lot of matches, and we could all play this game. What is the difference that makes the difference? Can you spot, even if it's invisible, why one would narrowly win and the other narrowly lose? Because it's going to be 52%, 53% of points. It's not going to be 80-20 or, massive. No, it's going to be margins.
Yeah. So what are the things that we can do, guys? This is what we're going to be talking about the rest of the championships weekend. We're going to be doing this at every Grand Slam as a 2-week lead up. Mark, Lenny, and I are working on some really exciting things that we're going to be sharing with you over the very near future. Going to start coming out with a lot more content for you guys. That'll be both be on court and off. And just really appreciate you guys for tuning in. So for Mark, I'm Ramon Osa. Pleasure working with you guys today, and we'll see you soon.
Cheers, Ramon.